Okay, wonderful. So today is the second training in the Soil Health Network training series. Today we are talking about communicating with producers about soil health. We have Garrett Dyke with NRCS, Jen Aaron with Blue Raven Farm, and Kevin Richards currently with RB Ag as his current farm. Today, there's three key outcomes that we really hope are kind of some of your takeaways today. You may have some other takeaways, and that is okay. And I'm excited to hear what you do learn from today and I hope to apply to your work with producers around the state. Um, and we hope you strengthen skills to listen actively, center producer knowledge, and frame soil health in ways that align with producers' values and needs. Feel more confident having difficult conversations and meeting people where they are on various soil health topics, especially understanding that behavioral change takes time and trust. And lastly, learning from our wonderful panel and each other and problem solving together. And let me introduce our panelists for the day. Um, we're I was lucky to have photos of Jen as we did a farm profile for her through OrCAN, and you can read her blog post on our website. But Jen Aaron is with Blue Raven Farm. For the past 15 years, she has worked as both a farmer and an educator, including 7 years with OSU Extension. In 2016, she founded Blue Raven Farm, a 1.5-acre diversified operation focused on soil health, vegetable production, laying hens, and an orchard. Her work is driven by a commitment to continual learning and unlearning. She has spent the last decade studying, researching, and developing agroecological curriculum to better understand and communicate the complex relationships between soil microbiology and crop health. We have with us today as well Garrett Dyke with NRCS. Garrett has spent the last 15 years as a soil conservationist with NRCS Oregon, working alongside farmers on soil health projects across the state, including 10,000 acres of cover crops. That's a lot of acres of cover crops. He trains NRCS staff in technical skills and communication, has authored OSU Extension guides on soil management and cover cropping, and led on-farm trials featured in David Montgomery's book, What Your Food Ate. He is a frequent speaker at events including the Oregon Society of Soil Scientists, the Healthy Soils or Health Soils, Healthy Region Conference, and the High Desert Museum, where he enthralls audiences with the discovery that soil is truly amazing. Um, and last but not least, we have Kevin Richards joining us today. Kevin farms in Central Oregon, high desert, where his family grows hybrid carrot and parsley seed, grass seed, peppermint leaf, alfalfa, wheat, and hay. In addition to farming, Kevin serves on the board of directors for the local farm bureau and public schools. Prior to returning to full-time farming, Kevin served as a director of regulatory relations for the American Farm Bureau Federation's public policy team. He specialized in issues relating to biotechnology, sustainable ag, and international regulation and trade. Kevin has also worked as an international economic advisor on policy and development issues ranging from environmental regulation to infrastructure investment and public finance. He has experience working overseas with government officials and industry leaders in Australia, New Zealand, the Philippines, Vietnam, and Pakistan. Kevin attended Oregon State University, where he earned a bachelor's degree in economics, and Georgetown University, where he earned a master's degree or master's degrees in public policy and economics. So, really excited to have you all here today. With that, we can shift over to you all and learning more about you. So, I will stop sharing my screen. Thank you all for being here. Let me pull up my questions. So we'll start off with Jen. If you can spend 5 to 7 minutes just telling us a little bit more about yourself, and specifically, what is your story with farming and soil health? And some of you may have prepared visuals or not. It was up to you all. So if you'd like to share your screen, you're welcome to do so.
Awesome. I prepared visuals. This is a modified pechakucha that I had to put together for another event. So yeah, enjoy. Sorry. Um, I'm Jen Aaron. I'm an agroecologist. I'm a consultant. I'm a farmer. I'm an educator. I've worked with hundreds of farmers over the years. I've spent, about 15 years honing this fairly unique skill set. My farm beginning started with OSU Extension Service, where I was working to train beginner farmers in an urban context. We farmed what I would consider, like a conventional organic model where we were utilizing annual tillage and NPK applications. And things grew, pretty well to start. And then in the last few years, I really noticed an uptick in weeds, as shown in on the left or on the right. And weeds, pest disease. Through that program, we had an opportunity to visit a lot of farms throughout the Willamette Valley and was really noticing that farmers were struggling with much the same. And lot of time listening to farmers and growers talk about their tillage regime and then going out into the field and talking more about the weed pressure and what is it that they're doing to mitigate weeds and have so much respect for farmers as I'm a farmer and I know how hard it is and it was so heartbreaking to just see how so many producers were losing the battle to weeds. So that's kind of was the first piece that I started to tuck away of questioning, like, what's this connection between tillage and weed pressure? And at the time, there just wasn't a whole lot of information out there. The next piece that really put me into a space of questioning what was happening was this beat. And I was working with OSU Extension at the time. It was a harvest day. The students that I was supporting at the time were off at small farm school, so I was left to harvest, wash, and pack CSA on my own, and which was something that was usually spearheaded by the farmers I was working with. And so I'm out there harvesting these beets, and if you recognize this, you can see that it has horrible boron deficiency. And yet, like, we had such great access to the soil science department at OSU. We had done tissue analysis, we had done soil analysis, and there was no indication of boron deficiency. And it's this moment that I was like, something's not right. There's something that is missing. And it was on that drive home that I was like, I think that we have a microbial deficiency in our soil. And 10 years ago, the information on soil health was not nearly what it is today. And I didn't sleep for 2 days. And I just went down the interweb of like, how do we connect the dots? Like, what's going on with the connection between soil microbiology, soil health, and our crop production? And that coincides with the start of starting my own farm, Blue Raven Farm. Into that, we moved here in 2015. Our first year of production was really in 2017. And right out of the gate, I was like, I really wanted to just figure out a way to grow differently than how I had grown for the university. And so that looked like a 180-degree turn. And I stumbled my way through it and received a lot of criticism along the way from producers, which I thought was really interesting. So I know that that's something that as service providers, like we're faced with that this threat of like, oh, something is new and change is hard. And so the first reaction is to be defensive or to be critical. And I'm thankful for that because I just put my head down, and my mantra for so many years was just like trust and stay the course. And what happened was pretty incredible. In about year 3 or year 4, I started to really notice this massive decrease in weeds, pest, and disease, which of course what resulted in a really big reduction in labor. And so I started getting pretty public about this story, this 5-year trial of what we did, which at the time, like there just wasn't a lot published about soil health and the resounding impacts that it can have. And larger scale producers started to call, email, show up at my workshops. And we're small at Blue Raven, and they're like, "Well, hey, this is great. Like, how do we do this on a larger scale?" And my answer was, "Oh gosh, I don't know. I don't have that context yet." So essentially, I took a year sabbatical and had the opportunity to go study with Nicole Masters, a world-renowned soil ecologist, and really hone my skills in understanding soil health on a larger scale. I was one of 18 international land stewards in this program, and it was the smallest. Most of my cohort was at like a 300-acre range. So I was like, okay, just trying to figure it out. So it's been pretty profound. Not only that scaling up piece, but also a huge part of that working with Nicole was how do you communicate with producers? So that just feels like this underlying gift that just keeps giving. So since that time, I've helped producers inoculate thousands and thousands of pounds of cover crop seed, helping to calibrate larger scale equipment. That center photo is a no-till drill. We're working through trying to how to get multi-species cover crop to drop efficiently through mulch. Sounds easy, and it just takes a little bit of time and finagling. And growing, encouraging producers to grow lots of multi-species cover crops. And what does that look like? And how does that, what's the timing of that? How to mitigate all of those, crop residues and things like that. So at the end of the day, just so passionate about this work. Feel like there's so much to be learned, and there's so much that we just don't know yet. So just really excited to be here. And thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Jen, for sharing about your story with soil and soil health. But I'll pass it off to Kevin. Tell me a little bit more about yourself and your story with farming and soil health.
Yeah, so my family has a long history in farming and timber in Oregon, but actually my grandparents on both sides of my parents did not were not involved in production farming until the late 80s when my parents decided to give up their lifestyle in Clackamas County and relocate to Central Oregon to Jefferson County, and they purchased 400 acres, and that became the farm that I grew up on, and that became that's the beginning of our evolution in farming in the Madras area. And I'd give my parents tons of credit for not having any immediate background in farming, for really prioritizing soil health kind of right off the bat. If you look at a soil test in our area, you don't have to be a soil scientist to look at the organic levels and just know there's just not a lot going on in that soil for the most part. And so pretty early on in their career as full-time farmers, they were, just focusing on building the tests that they have the agronomists pull every year. And so that started exploration into cover crops. And I think that to their credit, they looked past the short-term costs and started to see the long-term benefits very early on. And so the economics of it really started to pay off in terms of just building soil health generally. But we had some really interesting examples where there was some property that they had farmed for quite a while, and they leased the ground directly adjacent to it. Started it in the exact same cropping cycle, and just immediately year 1, 2, 3 started to see a yield boost, and even just a visual difference in the health of the crop in those two fields. And so they started seeing those economic benefits very early on, and some of the same benefits in terms of weed suppression and water holding capacity that Jen's mentioning. In our area, we still can do some field burning, and it even became a way, save the cost of the fee on field burning and reincorporate residue of crop, and so the financial and the economic aspect really started to shift, I think, over time, but even early on. And then a lot of Oregon and particularly Central Oregon, mint has been a very important economic crop in the past, but it's um, much less so today. And the main reason is for the proliferation of verticillum wilt. And so once I was back in full-time farming, we started exploring using biofumigant cover crops for nematode suppression and building soil health and helping to mitigate verticillum wilt in our mint rotation. And then that transition to seeing, okay, some neighbors are using manure and compost to build up micronutrients and carbon and organic levels in their soil. So why don't we experiment with that a little bit? And we saw great results, but the economics weren't there. It was quite expensive on the scale. And so we decided to make some investments, and over a matter of just a couple years, we were able to invest and convert most of our phosphorus and potassium on the farm, our sources from manure and compost, self-applied on 800 acres a year. So that was kind of it's my experience and kind of the evolution of our farm today. I farm with my brother, and we farm about 2,000 acres around the Madras and Culver area. And the interesting thing is we have a little bit of ground that's been in my family in our farm rotation for decades. So it's had some past investment in soil health. We have some ground that we've purchased recently and are trying to invest in soil health, but it's obviously at a different stage of that cycle. And then we also have quite a bit of leased ground that to be frank, has been neglected over the last, say, decade plus, partially due to drought, partially due to hemp crop kind of coming in and then leaving quickly, leaving abruptly. And so we have a range of ground that we're trying to get the most out in terms of productivity. But some of it has a good history, and some of it a much shorter and a more neglectful history.
So interesting. I have a lot of questions, and I think the follow-up questions will get us there too, to hear more about the benefits of soil health and how you go about that. So thanks for sharing, Kevin. All right, Garrett, tell us more about yourself. What's your story with soil health and farming?
Thank you, Sage. Well, again, good morning to everyone. I'm Garrett. First thing you should know about me is that I'm a father of four, including an infant. So if I suffer from some brain fog, I hope that you could forgive me. I'm running a little bit low on sleep. It's kind of hard to figure out where I want to go with this. So we'll just try to make sense of it. The picture that I have on my background is a picture that I took. It's the Douglas Hollow Schoolhouse. And so I'm going to tease you with this. There's a story that goes with this picture, and I'm going to weave my way there because it's quite interesting. But first, let me tell you a little bit more about me and my experiences. So my grandparents were dairy farmers until they passed, and so I grew up working on the farm and had an appreciation of agriculture, and knew that I wanted nothing to do with farming. Sorry, Kevin. But I went to school to study agronomy because that's what I was passionate about. Um, I loved soils. I was in FFA as a high school student, and I won a lot of awards related to soils competitions and agronomy. And so I went to Oregon State, and then I started with NRCS doing conservation work because that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to work with people like my grandparents to hopefully make their lives better and make the land better. And so now I have 15 years with the NRCS. I've worked all over Oregon, including Hillsboro, Tangent, Klamath Falls, the Dalles, and now Redmond. Um, I immediately got interested in the soil health campaign that NRCS has been a leader of for many, many years now. And I got involved in all kinds of activities with the agency. I was one of the founding members of the NRCS Oregon Soil Health Committee, which is responsible for training our staff on soil health. Every couple of years, we deliver the Soil Health and Sustainability course, which is required for conservation planner certifications. So many of you that work for a conservation district, if you have planners that get certified, they go through that course. So I'm one of the trainers for that. Many of my clients have been featured by the NRCS National Soil Health Division in their PR campaigns for doing outstanding work. Um, I've been an agency liaison for a while now with the Western Cover Crops Council from their very inception. And we just finished our cover crop selection tool, which if you haven't checked it out yet, I know Shannon has. I recommend that you do so. It's available online now. We've been working hard on that for a long time. And I've been helping out, doing more local stuff recently. If you are interested, the High Desert Museum in Bend right now has a soils exhibit that you can go and check out that's available for the next couple of months. And I helped consult on the soils exhibit and gave them some input on how to plan it. And then I'm gonna do another plug here. I have a talk that's coming up on December 1st on the recipe of healthy soil, and it's in Bend and for the High Desert Museum. So I put the link in the chat. I've been told that the tickets are nearly sold out. So if you want to jump on that, make sure that you do so pretty quickly. Um, I've met most of my soil icons or idols, including Ray Archuleta and Gabe Brown, and they are lovely people, let me tell you. Um, and so now I think I want to transition into giving you some lessons and some stories from my experiences that will help you to carry forward in your journey. I would be remiss as an NRCS employee if I didn't plug those 4 soil health principles. And so I'm going to weave a little bit of a story using the soil health principles. Um, the first one, I'm actually going to start with the last one, which is maximize diversity. And that is related to this picture that's behind me. So this is a field, you may recognize this crop. It's canola. And in Wasco County, where this is being grown, um, there's probably 2 or 3 fields of canola in the entire county at any given time. It probably accounts for less than 0.1% of the total acres. And the reason why this particular producer that was a client of mine is growing canola is to introduce diversity into their crop rotation. Uh, both economic diversity, but also soil health diversity. So this farmer intentionally chose to grow canola because of the benefits that it brings to the soil. And anecdotally, they've observed benefits to their wheat crop, which is their primary cash crop as a result of introducing canola. But I wanted to tell you a little bit, something a little bit different, which is this year that I took this photo was 2018. And it just so happens that in that year, it was time for the canola to be planted in this field around the schoolhouse, a very old historic building. And 2018 was the year of the substation fires, which you may recall. The substation fires burned over 100,000 acres in Wasco County, and it went right through this area. where the schoolhouse is. 99% of the fields were in wheat or wheat residue, and they burned extremely hot and extremely fast. And when the fire got to this canola field, it snuffed out. And this canola field saved the schoolhouse from burning down. We lost dozens of historic buildings during those substation fires, and the schoolhouse still stands today because of that canola field. So, um, that's maximized diversity. There's more benefits to it besides just soil benefits. And it was, yeah, it was truly miraculous what happened. Now, I want to pivot and show you another picture. Oh, well. So this is a picture now of another field that suffered from the substation fires. This field actually burned. There was nothing left. There was just ash. And there wasn't any residue, and it was blowing very pretty bad. It's a very sandy soil, and it's a very windy area, and so the wind erosion was pretty bad. And we helped this farmer to plant a cover crop of forage barley, which is what you're seeing here now. And in the springtime, the forage barley grew and protected the soil. That's the soil health principle of maximizing soil cover. So instead of just leaving this field to waste all winter long, we planted some cover. And then in the springtime, the farmer called me up and said, you know, that cover crop is looking really good, and I would like to hay some of it because I've lost so much of my grazing lands due to the wildfire, and I need the forage. And so I went out and visited the farm, the field with the farmer, and I took this picture after I gave the green light for them to do some strip haying. So that's what you're seeing in this picture here. They're doing strip haying. And this was a bit of a compromise, a management decision, a little bit out of the box to permit the farmer, you know, to get some value out of it and to maintain that cover benefit. The next picture that I want to show you, which is also related to this fire, is my proudest moment in my career. And so this was another field that had suffered the effects of the wildfire, completely burned, no residue left, just bare soil and ash. And we planted a cover crop of wheat on this field. And you could tell that the wheat, it didn't get very big before the cover crop was terminated. And that's because of crop insurance rules, they have to terminate at a certain date. And so the cover crop just doesn't get very big by that termination deadline, but it was enough to save this field. What you're seeing is the effects or the outcome of a thunderstorm that dropped 2 inches in an hour that we had the summer following, so the summer of 2019 following the wildfire. And what you're seeing here is that the water that ran off laid down that cover crop residue like a carpet, but it didn't take any soil with it. And I mean, we're talking about cover crop residue that's 4 inches or 5 inches tall that saved fields like this one. It was truly incredible. Um, so the last, I need to find it here. The last picture that I want to end this story with, I call this my bleak midwinter photosynthesis. So this speaks to the last soil health principle, which is to maximize living roots. And this is a picture that I took in my garden after a foot of snow had melted in February. And underneath, I found my cover crop that I had planted as green as can be. It had been photosynthesizing the entire time under a foot of snow. And if that's not the definition of maximized living roots, I don't know what is. So it truly speaks to things that are possible beyond your imagination. You want to revisit your question?
Yes, and I'll start with Kevin on that question to get those follow-up questions going. And I love to see all the photos and visual proof that why soil health practices are important. So thanks for sharing, Gary. Um, Kind of going back to Kevin, what you had shared about the benefits of soil health practices. My question for you and for the other panelists as well is how do you frame the benefits of soil health practices in ways that kind of connect with your values or with other producers' values, goals, and kind of day-to-day realities? And what are some entry points to talking about soil health practices, soil health benefits, like economic benefits or climate or social or health?
So there's a lot to unpackage there, and so apologies if I kind of bounce all over the place. But one barrier I think, or one difficulty is, at least my experience, or a lot of the farmers that I interact with, um, their eyes kind of glaze over when people start talking about soil health for its own sake. Um, it's they've got a lot of priorities, a lot of checkbooks, checkbook to balance and stuff like that. And so I think really getting past that and immediately to, okay, what does this really mean for me in the short term, is really important to open up the conversation. And I think often there's two kind of competing challenges. One is, does it make sense for me economically? Um, the difficulty is, we can sit and theorize and show long-term benefits very easily, I think. But ultimately, a lot of growers, they're battling short-term cash flow. And so even if the long-term economic benefits are very compelling, they really need to see a short-term return on that investment. Otherwise, they're taking cash from one area and it's going to suffer somewhere else. And so I think realizing that it's not just, recognizing and valuing the long-term benefits. It's also appreciating what it means for kind of short-term cash flow needs for the farm. And then farmers are notorious for, having uh, 25 hours worth of work in a 24-hour day. And so that's the other thing is, even if the economics of it are very compelling for myself, and I know for many other growers, it's still a matter of, do I have the equipment? Do I have the time? Is it feasible? Can I get it done, in the optimal season? So those, what I would say, like logistical challenges, sometimes even dwarf, even the short and long term financial or economic benefits.
And are there some specific tools or frameworks that you offer to folks when thinking about those questions about the logistics and short-term actions?
Um, I think, yeah, I think what I find for myself as a grower is it's very easy to look at programs and incentives and then try to just apply those to your farm. I think it is much more beneficial to have the conversation of what are we trying to achieve. Um, Leave aside any programs, any benefits. What are the priorities for the farm as a operation, and the soil and the fields as kind of our most valuable appreciating asset. So I think that's a really important way to start the conversation, because I know that I've been guilty of, trying to force a square peg into a round hole, just because the numbers seem to make sense, and ultimately we set ourselves up for failure. And then uh, I think Garrett has helped me with this in the past, is thinking about some of the things that um, were mentioned or highlighted in his examples, is that you have to not just think about do I want to cover crop? You have to think about, okay, what species, single species or multi-species, what time of year, when do we destroy, uh, what are we going to do with the residue, what kind of equipment needs are necessary. And so I've seen one and I don't have one, but a rubric or a checklist for kind of running through those logistical questions would be really, I think, valuable to making or helping a grower, ensure that they're covering bases and really considering every aspect of it. And then certainly for myself, one challenge I've faced is you you're still going to have a reporting and compliance need, and to help growers plan and do that as efficiently as possible, so that during their busiest times they're still reporting and documenting and complying, so that they're seeing the benefits, but also complying with the program, and we're actually able to document the benefits.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing. Yeah, wonderful. Go back to Jen. Um, Jen, what are some entry points for you to talking about soil health with producers that you work with and the benefits there too?
All right. Such a great question. And I tend to, I guess I'll answer it a little bit more broader context, because I feel like every farmer's context is so incredibly unique, and there just is not a one size fits all solution to soil health. There isn't this magical recipe. So oftentimes just starting the conversation with that is really helpful. Before I meet with a new client, I provide a detailed questionnaire so that I have a really good sense of where they're coming from, all of their, not only the details of their production, and their site, their soil, but also their challenges, their successes, what's working, what's not working, what do they feel excited about, what do they want to improve. And then when I am on site, I can move into those places and kind of go for that lowest hanging fruit in terms of like meeting them where they're at. I'll try to acknowledge the infinite barriers that farmers face. There's the economic, there's the labor, there's the burnout, there's the depression, there's all these things. So making sure that I'm sensitive to that when I arrive on farm, and really just try to listen first and foremost, and based off of where they are coming from the questionnaire, from what I'm seeing, I can start to hone in and focus on like what are some of those elements of like where can the farmer benefit the most, and maybe one of their biggest concerns was about the climate extremes. So what are some of those things that we can do to address those in terms of soil health? A lot of producers that I work with are just so overrun with weeds. So that seems to be something that we can address by talking about shifts in management or shifts in on their inputs, like what they're adding or what they're not adding. I see a lot of phosphorus levels. Most of the farmers I'm working with have phosphorus levels that are through the roof, and not on Kevin's scale where it's thousands and thousands of acres and you're trying to apply a really thin layer of manure or compost, but for smaller acreages where compost application is a little bit more doable, still like huge cost and labor expense. And if phosphorus levels are high and they're not aware, that's something that we can see visually through some of the weed species that are on their farm. So that's a really nice one to see, is like, oh, you like check out this sea of pigweed and lamb's quarter. Like, hey, are you aware that that can be an indicator of excess phosphorus in your soil? And that's a cool one for farmers because they can see it and they're like, yeah, and it's twofold because now it's reducing labor costs and input costs for them. Like that's something that they can take off their plate.
You just shared a little bit of an example too of some ways to identify um, unhealthy soil or imbalance in the soil, but I'm also wondering if you have another example of a time when you had a challenging conversation around soil health with either as a producer yourself or with another farmer, and what helped you navigate that effectively?
Yeah, I would say that the of all the producers that I work with, tillage extremes seems to be the most contentious. Whether it be, and it's always like too much or not enough. And I think that it can go both ways. Yes, there's this soil health principle that is minimize disturbance. And with that, there is this dogma around no till and that no disturbance is the best case scenario. And that can be that can be a challenging conversation to have with folks who would just want to be following these soil health principles to the letter. And I've seen some farmers really suffer by not addressing underlying compaction issues, and they're trying to grow and have a production farm with a compaction layer that's 5 or 6 inches deep, and that's tough. So just talking about like how do I have those moments where I can be like, hey, so talking through that, the challenges in soil where we're degrading soil very, very quickly. It's not from the one time or the two time or the three time till or rip or chisel plow or whatever it is. It's that repeated tillage again and again and again, over and over again, that is degrading soil aggregation and compromising soil microbiology. So having this conversation of finding some balance is really important. And then on the flip side, I've worked with producers that are just really hitting it hard with tillage equipment year after year, and you can see it in their soil. You can see it in their weed pressure, you can see it in their pest pressure, you can see it in their crop health. I worked with a producer in California last year who was doing this deep, deep ripping every year, and we went out with a penetrometer, and his compaction layer was 5 or 6 inches at the surface. I was like, okay, like let's rethink this. Like we don't necessarily need to be disturbing soil at a 3 foot depth. Like how do we bring that correction up a little bit and mitigate compaction more at the surface through cover crops or adding compost or whatever, or a combination of all the things. Does that answer the question?
Yes, I think that's a great example. The tillage, reduced tillage, tickle tillage. I think Jen, you've used that term before, and
Yeah.
heavy tillage, and kind of yeah, finding that balance. Um, Garrett, I want to ask you, what, in your experience, what helps create a productive, trusting conversation with producers who are kind of just beginning to explore soil health practices or who may be skeptical about them? And how have you built that trust?
Well, arrogance is the quickest way to lose trust. So the opposite of arrogance is humility. Every time you walk onto a farm and you start to think about or plan a soil health project, you never actually know exactly what's going to happen. Um, and so being like accepting of that is important. And also, I don't think I've ever had a soil health project where everything went perfectly according to plan and there wasn't some kind of negative drawback. And so anticipating those and then helping your producer to face them builds a lot of trust versus being the salesman that comes in and says, do this, do that, and then you walk away and you leave, and then they're left to pick up the pieces, right? That's not a trusting relationship. And so in general, you need to align your goals with their goals. And and there's two questions. What do they want and what do they need? And these are different questions. What do they want? More often than not, it's not that they want healthy soils. Some people do, but what most producers want is more profit, less risk, better longevity, and less time, put into their work spent working, right? And what they need is resources and informed decisions, and planning. So try to align yourself in that way, right? Don't make a recommendation that's good for soil but bad for profit, right? It needs to be framed in a way where they feel like you are on their side. That's basically it.
Right. Yeah. Super insightful.
Sage, if I could just add one thing.
Yeah.
I mean, as farmers, we often kind of live in isolation, but we always like to look across and see what our neighbor's doing. And so I think a grower network and connecting growers, experienced growers with, one other growers that are, trying new practices, I think is very beneficial.
Thanks for adding that in. Yeah. Well, I want to make sure we get time for other people's questions. Kevin, kind of going back to what you were sharing earlier, do you think if there were better systems to support farmers, do you think the potential could shift the focus of short-term cash flow incentives? So rather than the focus being on short-term cash flow incentives, what if there were better systems in place for farmers?
Um, Yeah, I guess maybe two responses. One would be, depends on the system and the program. But the other is, I'm wary as a grower myself, but also just someone that, thinks about public policy. Um, is, is there a risk of creating a program or a system that isn't ultimately sustainable for the farm? And so the goal should, in my view, the goal should be, helping, assisting, and incentivizing, getting to a point of independence and sustainability. I worry that especially in, you know, when the economics of farming are as challenging as they are today, that we create a dependency that is maybe ultimately hurting more than it's helping.
Yeah, Gary.
I was just trying to remind myself of the question. Um, I
Mhm.
think there's lots of systems. Um, I don't think that's the deficiency. Um, it's it's yeah, it's more of like Kevin is saying, like having the right network and support group and yeah, they definitely look at what their neighbor is doing and they need to see results. It's less about systems, more about results. So having some small wins, can really help to gain momentum.
If I may, I guess I shouldn't have said systems because the systems that we're currently working with and farmers are working with aren't currently working. So my, I guess, shift would be the focus of having those support systems and those resources for farmers to be more sustainable and to be more independent. Farmers are already siloed in the sense where they're having to depend on their own resources and themselves, right? And that's not working. So if there were an implementation of some kind of better support system that was more of a statewide regional focus, that could allow for farmers to be more sustainable. I'm just wondering if that would be more of an impact for farmers to be able to then better shift their focus on the soil because there is that really quick turnaround that people are looking for, but that doesn't necessarily give people the time to increase their soil health to have better production.
Yeah. Um, no, I mean, I like the premise of your question. I guess for myself, and I think it maybe is is a useful test. As I like to think about, okay, if there's a barrier to entry, if I'm able to remove that barrier to entry for this particular practice or for this particular priority, once I remove that and I've adopted a practice, would I continue to do it without any incentive? And to me, that's a real good test of, are the economics and the ecosystem and the soil benefits, are they aligned? Um, they then of course the getting past that barrier entry and adopting a practice and making it something that's routine and sustainable is really the challenge. If the answer is yes, that they are aligned.
Jen, I'm wondering if you can speak on kind of more farmer cohorts or networks or what benefits you've seen of those peer-to-peer networks.
In terms of some of support that's out there, yeah, I guess as an overreaching arc, I would really love to see there just be a complete shift in that neighbor pressure that is felt, where instead of the farmer who is doing the soil health practices being kind of frowned upon, or like being like, oh, that's what are they doing? What is it? Like having that paradigm be shifted into like, oh, it's the person that is spraying, or doing the practices that are harmful, where that's the thing that's raising the eyebrows. Like, and I feel like slowly we're starting to get there. Like it's so exciting to see this. Like, just to be a part of today is incredible. I know, just even 10 years ago, there was so little support for farmers. So it is happening. And I think that little by little, we're starting to see more community support, which is amazing. But yeah, we still have a long way to go. I know I personally still, even though I have a international network of producers who are doing this work, I still feel I personally still feel really isolated, and a little lonely in this work, to be honest.
Down here in Southern Oregon, I felt like the soil and water conservation districts and NRCS and some of the government agencies have done so much hard work to gain trust and rapport with farmers and in the community. And, certainly with the shutdown and with payments being stalled or not happening, services being disrupted, I'm kind of wondering about how folk, as we're talking about how to communicate with producers about how we can start to rebuild some of that trust and rapport, and kind of, pick up some of those threads or relationships that may have been stalled or neglected over the last, 2 months or so. And I just wonder if folks have thoughts on the call about how we can kind of regain that ground that we've lost, where, folks were applying for EQIP, they were coming into the district, it felt like that there was a lot of trust and momentum built. And I just wonder how other folks on the call and in the group are kind of wrestling with that delay or that pause in services, or kind of the disrupted trust that may have happened, since some of those payments have still not come out. We're kind of still in the midst of that. And I wonder how folks are adapting to that. Yeah, that's kind of what it feels like down in Southern Oregon. It's pretty quiet. Kind
Yeah,
of crickets. We're all like, oh, what's
I don't,
next?
I don't know that we've seen it yet. I think that's still to play out.
I appreciate you asking that question, Rihanna, because honestly, I work with a farmer up here in Amity, 86 acres, and they have 4,000 or four 10,000-gallon tanks of water that needs to be hooked up, and NCRS has just dropped them. And it's been 3 years. She hasn't been able to plant any seeds.
Right, where there's these different scales, the different like layers of an onion, I guess, of like the individual trust and relationships that farm service providers and producer to producer and soil to producer, like those relationships and trust. And then looking at these bigger systems or institutions and entities and how that trust can be broken so easily too. And so what are some ways that we can build that trust and both and with the systems and with the people because it's people in those systems and so it's you all know it's very complicated and how can we be innovative and find those systems that or create new systems like a soil health network rather than relying on institutions that may not be serving us and bringing folks in together. Then thank you all for answering those questions, and we'll continue to chat with you in the breakout groups. Maybe we can start with group one. Is there a few folks from group one that want to share some of what they discussed?
I took the notes for the group. This is Shannon. I'm talking through my phone. I'm going to start with a little bit about what our case study is, or should I read the whole thing? Sorry, you blinked out there for a second, Sage, on the instructions.
Good call. Yeah. Give a summary of what the case study was and share some takeaways from the conversation.
Okay. So this is a farmer in an area where they're being prioritized for drinking water protections. They grow grass seed and hazelnuts. There were some of the projects that were really easy, like riparian enhancement, grass waterways to prevent erosion. Those things were no problem. But putting a conservation cover or cover crop into the orchard was a non-starter. They said it was a no-go. Because they do grow grass seed, they wanted to make sure that they didn't have any kind of economic hit on their grass seed. They didn't want to have any contamination from other species that were getting in there. And so the orchard floor remains naked, with this first priority being like making sure that their grass seed crop is going to be okay. And so that was a little bit about it. I think that first thing that we noticed is that, hey, there are a lot of other conservation or cover crops that don't involve grass. So you could do something that's not going to be an issue for contaminating your grass seed. Another, we talked about, okay, well, like there's legumes you could use, or brassicas, or forbs, or pollinator crops. And so those were kind of that first thought. The other first thought was, the way that he's talking about, or the way this producer is talking about it, seems like it's an economic issue. So what are the economics behind this motivation for not being able to put a cover crop or conservation in? And so then when it came to follow-up questions, we kind of honed in on, okay, it's no-go to put grass in there. Maybe that means that, what they're thinking is that this is an economic barrier. So what kind of things could we do to make it feel like this is not going to have an economic impact on the producer? And so the follow-up questions were kind of get a little bit more about what those economic concerns would be, because contamination of the purity of his grass seed was a big issue. Like, okay, well, what if we can get rid of that grass seed contamination issue? Are there other things that are still going to be stopping you? Like, let's say let's plant the same grass seed that you have growing in other parts of your grass seed operation and see if that might be able to be a benefit. Are there other things that are still going to stop? Because there are logistic challenges in hazelnuts and cover cropping. And so wanting to kind of dig into that a little bit further. It's kind of one of the things we talked about as far as follow-up could be, to ask if there's any kind of, we'll talk with them about ODA and potential programs or challenges or compliance issues. making really sure not to make this like a threat, like we're going to report you or anything like that, but that some of these ways could be a way to, or some of these conservation cover crops could be a way to get that target kind of off of your back, so that the grower has these real life issues that they have to deal with in a regular space, that stress of daily life, and often feel like that has a target on the back. How can we use this to win the public relations battle? Kind of framing it, some of it that way. I think that kind of goes into the how would we frame those soil health benefits, and we talked about this a little bit, but it is how we help them to understand those long-term gains when there can be that short-term challenge. And I thought there was a really nice conversation about we need to be able to show them some really short-term wins, and those might be small, right? Like sometimes the big economic benefits on that long-term scale, they need to know that. They need to know that that's at the other side of it. And there's a couple of different ways we can look at that. Like, yes, there's data that could be produced, or they could look at a producer who's already doing it well and seeing what they're doing, if there's a neighbor or somebody else. But then also to give them some of these kind of like short-term nuggets of like, here's a real difference that we see just in temperature and moisture when we have cover, and how is that going to influence your plant's ability to be disease resistant. So we talked about kind of that framing of soil health benefits in understanding that long-term play, but giving them the short-term nuggets along the way. And then when we're talking about what information and tools and resources, the first thing I always think about are these like giant data systems, and we can get all this information and all the economics. But we also just talked about case studies and the benefit that case studies can have just to be able to tell that story, tell the story of other people who have made it work. And that if we're doing a case study, it has to be specific to the local area, the production system, and really focus on the economics for that case study to really land with other farmers. That's what we got through.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for sharing, Shannon. Sounds like you had some great follow-up questions. That's what really stood out to me. How about group 2? What did you all discuss? Can you share a little bit about the case study you had and what you talked about?
I think that was our group. I'm not entirely sure what group number we were in. I think we were.
This was with Jen.
Okay, yes,
Cool.
that would be us. I was taking notes. So our case study was a small veggie farmer that wants to implement soil health principles. And how the first question was like, how do we start this process? And there was a lot of really good like starting points that we all really resonated with. So really just kind of like starting with like the baseline of seeing the space in person. As a service provider, you go there, you're kind of touching base with the farmer, identifying their kind of like their weak links, maybe some of the things that are really stressing them out that they are like really needing some immediate assistance with. And just kind of like overall getting to know like the capacity with like what the farmer is working with, being resources and what have you not. And then it was like, okay, well, where do you take them for support? And so that was a really layered question. That's just due to the nuances of all the different farming models. Everybody has their own situation and their own implementation, their own understanding of soil health. So it's really like kind of being able to like get on the reel with them and find out like what soil health does mean to them, how and having those conversations is really how you figure out how to navigate kind of like that solution problem solving piece, just because not everybody is interested in learning about microbiology. And, it's just one of those things where you just have to kind of meet them on their level. And so being able to have that relationship with them kind of, the next question was like, the difficulties that we face with these conversations being a service provider. And it really resonated around that piece of building relationships with people and just being able to have that personal understanding that like, if you're a farmer and you've dealt with issues before, that like farming be prepared to fail. I loved how Jen quoted it as being open and honest about the experience and reminding people that it might not work. Start small and understand the power of I don't know, and what that kind of humility does to a conversation and a partnership. When people are looking to ask for help, it's not always an easy ask. So really getting on that personal level and getting to understand that like farming is failure and failing is okay, is a really important piece, I think, when establishing relationships like this to help people find those benefits for soil health.
I like that farming is failing and failing is okay and making mistakes is okay. And starting small or with that, I don't know, is really powerful and honest. Kind of like Garrett, you mentioned humility too is really key. Wonderful. And group three, I think with Garrett, what did you all tell us about the case study and some takeaways?
Yeah, so that was us. Um, we had a pretty good long conversation. It was very experiential. So it was nice to hear from those in our group who did have a lot of experience with similar thoughts to the case study. In regards to the case study, in short, it's we were helping a farmer or rancher implement a soil health practice. Things didn't go as well as the farmer was hoping within 6 months, and they are now considering pulling out of the practice. And so the case study is just revolving around, well, what do you do in these situations where these practices, don't work so well? Um, so like I said, a lot of it was experiential. Got to hear a lot from Garrett, who's had good luck working with farmers and telling us a bit about when stuff went wrong, along with some of the other people in our group. And I'll just work through our guiding questions. So the main thing was first thing is what did we notice and all that. And a lot of the conversation was revolved around expectations, trying to keep expectations appropriately calibrated towards what they should expect. Checking in to make sure expectations were properly told to the farmer so they knew what was going to happen. Big part that's also going to be like that time frame portion, like 6 months isn't really the longest time in an agriculture system. Especially with like soils and everything, stuff takes a while to happen, and the time frame for which you expect changes can be different depending on the soils. Another big portion was, trying to work with that client, going back to them and figuring out what didn't work and try to figure out why it didn't work. So a lot of what was said was, well, sometimes things could happen like something unexpected come along. For instance, maybe you are putting in seeds, such as with Penny's expectation or Penny's example, where she said she worked with a farmer who was trying to put in a cover crop in an orchard. They weren't able to drill and broadcast it, but they got washed out by an unfortunate rain. So working within these unexpected events and how to keep farmers still motivated, potentially downscaling, especially if you're working with these farmer working on smaller scales. So that way, when you're trying something new, if something goes bad, it's not going to, hurt anywhere near as much as if they did, their full 20, 40, 50 acres. Let's see. There was a lot of topic on or discussion on what kind of tools we would need information. So a big point that Garrett brought up was definitely connecting producers to other farmers and peers who are doing interesting new practices that are maybe benefiting soil health. To get them talking to each other could really help get them interested in doing something new. And one thing that they also come up that I don't see the notes on was talking about the complexity of ag systems. It's very hard, going back to expectations, to explain what should happen when you're making changes on an agriculture system. We're talking about having to interact with, our various nutrient cycles, the differences in soil topology, and then just what type of practices are being implemented there can all have an effect on what's gonna potentially be the outcome from whatever practice they implement. So again, that's coming back to expectations, how it's kind of hard to explain that when you're in these complex systems, and there's a lot of unexpected things that could be happening behind the scenes.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Caesar, for sharing and for your group discussion. And from what Nikita shared to this case study, it's talking about that failure or that mistake, and then how do you kind of build that trust again and come back with that producer and the importance of peer-to-peer, I think was something that you highlighted too. All right, we are nearing the end of the session.
And thanks for inviting me to participate and contribute. And as a kind of a service recipient, way more than a service provider, I just really appreciate the thoughtfulness and the approach and the empathy that you all demonstrate for growers.
Thank you so much, Kevin. That's the goal here. All right, thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.